If you couldn't tell from the title and thumbnail, this video is centering my slight obsession with Papyrus from Undertale. That loud, egocentric, and silly skeleton has plagued my mind for years. Recently, my friends have been asking me what is so intriguing about his character, and I always find it hard to explain. So, that's what I'm doing in this video. Throughout this video, I'm just assuming that you have general knowledge of the game and its roots, mainly the pacifist, no mercy, and knowing that there generally are varied neutral roots. And while this video will be verging on an analysis, nothing that I say is meant to be taken as canon. This video is centered on why I like Papyrus, not why you should. If you are interested in analysis videos and posts, I'll link some in the description. Now, I should warn you about a few things. I will mention things in this video regarding death and suicide and just general angst. If that's cool with you, then just sit back, relax, or just do whatever you're doing while this video plays in the background. If you are literally watching the video, please ignore how bad I am at Celeste. When I was first typing up this script, I tried to compile a bunch of different Papyrus analysis posts I've read, but that felt way too flavorless and repetitive. So instead of messily regurgitating the info of a million pre-existing posts, I'll talk about the one that got me hooked on Papyrus in the first place. Then I'll branch from there. After some digging, I managed to find one of the first speculations into Papyrus's character that I remember reading, which, funnily enough, was a subchapter in a theory regarding goners and how they relate to Sans' behavior. I'll link this and any other posts I talk about in the description below, and I really recommend reading further into them because there will be plenty of information from these that I won't be delving into in this video. In 2016, Tumblr users napstamuse and dimensionalbox made a post talking about how many mysteries there are surrounding Papyrus, and how we literally do not know the reason behind them, with one of the sentences being, "All we can say is we know about as much about Papyrus as we do about Gaster." Gaster, the possible character who has, 2 instances where we see any dialogue from in Undertale, compared to Papyrus, who literally has the most dialogue aside from the narrator. If you're completely clueless about his mysteries, I'll explain the tip of the iceberg. Basically, Papyrus lies a lot, for no discernible reason. Like, if you call him before entering Alphys's lab, he acts like he doesn't know what that is, but when you call him inside of the lab, he knows exactly what it is, and how he acts like he doesn't know what happens to Frisk once he brings them to Undyne, but after you fight him, he says that Asgore wants your soul to open the barrier. Sure, he plays it off like he doesn't know that using your soul would require killing you, but if he didn't know it was lethal, he wouldn't have hid the fact that he knew this at all. The one main commonality you can find in these lies is that he often lies around his brother, Sans. Like for the lab lie, he acts like he doesn't know what it is while Sans is with him, and he says, "I'm not sure what happens next," regarding the souls while Sans is with him. I could go on and on about all his weird oddities, like how he stays still in battle while no other enemy does that, how he's the only enemy that can never actually kill you, how the little actual backstory we get of him is acquired by his brother even though you can literally call him in every room, how his room has no music for some reason, the unsettling meanings behind his silly dialogue. You get the picture. Mostly because I painted a lot of it for you. There's also been a bunch of other analysis posts, like the ones you can find in the Masterpost I'm linking in the description, that have really helped form this attachment I have for Papyrus as a character. Not only are his actions and words odd, it is really interesting that characters like Flowey take so much interest in him. You know, the being that has lived through so many timelines with every character and has gotten bored of every one of them at some point, admitted that it took a while to get bored of Papyrus. To me, I feel like that's because there's so much about Papyrus that you really have to dig to figure out. Stuff that he hides so well that we, as the players who can go through GitHub dialogue dumps, cannot conclude definitively. Papyrus also has more interactions with the annoying dog than others, which is really interesting because that dog represents Toby Fox himself. And in the newsletter and other non-game content, Papyrus often gets a lot of attention there as well. If you're a casual enjoyer of the game, I recommend you look at the alarm clock dialogue or the Undertale Q&A sessions, the latter of which center Papyrus. I'll link them down below if you haven't read them. Regardless of whether or not you want to analyze them, They're just fun reads in general. My point is, the fact that both the literal creator of the game and the character who has seen almost all there is to see are so fascinated by Papyrus, it really speaks volumes. So why? Why am I so interested in this character who we really know nothing about? Well, that's exactly why. There is so much you can do with his character, and with possible reasons why he is the way he is, while still feeling like it could still make sense. I have so many headcanons for so many different types of the same guy that I have been obsessed with him for years. This is what has kept me hooked. So, fair warning, I am no longer talking about things that necessarily align perfectly with what's canonically true in Undertale. Lots and lots of theoreticals and headcanons. Generally, take this with a grain of salt. Most of what I say further on in the video isn't even close to being canon. I still will get into some speculations focused purely on canon material later on in this video, but most of this is just stuff I like to think about without necessarily wanting it to be canon. So, first, what could he be hiding? Lots of things, like maybe his past or what he remembers. A common fan theory is that Gaster is his and Sans' dad, or created them in some way, and I love that theory. I often gravitate to hand plates type of scenarios where Gaster experimented on them, but I also enjoy situations where Gaster was maybe a colleague, a cousin, a good dad, whatever. Regardless of whatever I think he may be hiding, I have the most fun with how he hides it and who he hides it from. I have a lot, and I mean a lot of art in regards to him putting on an act. It generally was my main thing online for like a year or two, or more. I'm not sure. There's just something about a character that is really hurting, but hides that hurt for the betterment of others. Like in the King Papyrus route, where he's the only boss that you don't kill, he goes along with Sans saying that his friends are on a vacation. It is pretty clear that he's lying about that, but whether he is lying to just Sans or also himself is the real question. For how long can he be this great papyrus without losing a bit of himself? The more he acts, the more he becomes his character. Sure, that may seem a bit far-fetched, but given that he barely talks about himself for a guy who seems super egotistical, you gotta assume that there's something else behind that mask. You may be wondering how this guy could be hiding so much about him even though he is so bad at lying in game, but generally, I view Papyrus to be a good liar who pretends to be really bad at lying. Let's think back on the King Papyrus route. I previously said that it is really clear he's lying, but I didn't mean that it's clear to everyone. While in my opinion, I believe that Sans knows Papyrus is aware of his friend's death, another common interpretation of the phone call in this route is that Papyrus is somehow fully unaware of the deaths of his friends. Depending on how you view Papyrus, you might view the call in this way too. You know what convinces me otherwise? This. This is enough to convince me that he knows of their passing, especially since that's one of the only two times we see him with the sad sprite. But his speech in the call still convinces people that he is unaware of the deaths that occurred. What I'm saying is, he is good at lying and playing his role as the oblivious and naive younger brother of Sans. I'll go further into this whole playing into his role thing later. I'm not saying that he's the best at lying, that you can never see through his lies, even when he isn't making it obvious that he's lying. I'm saying that he's better at it than what people give him credit for. Related to the lying, I often headcanon him to remember resets. Which, if you argue how canon that could be, you can go either way. He finds you familiar when you come back through runs, but you could also say other characters do as well. He calls the Passivert route the worst possible ending, but that could just be a silly joke that he doesn't realize the implications of. The odd fourth wall breaks that could also point towards him being aware of the player somehow, but I'm not getting into that. But just a silly joke Toby Fox added to be silly. Cynicism towards the future? Oh, wait, you didn't know about that? While he is quite the optimistic character, he never actually expects monsterkind to be free. I got these screenshots from Tumblr user twilight-amber's post that I'm linking in the description. Also check out twilight-amber stuff too, it's all great. Anyways, if Papyrus were to remember resets, even if it was for some reason only Flowery's resets, this view would make perfect sense. If monsters were to ever be freed, who's to say that it couldn't be taken away from them in an instant without anyone ever remembering it? Obviously, this is kind of far-fetched, but I love this headcanon more than any of my other ones, and this video isn't about proving theories, so it's fine. In most of my drawings, especially the comics, you can just kind of assume that Papyrus remembers resets in them. Let's delve further into this reset remembering headcanon. I like it, yeah, but why? There's two main reasons. I like to think about what he went through in those runs, and why he hides that he remembers them. Let's think about Flowey's runs. In a lot of the starting ones, he probably never interacted with Papyrus. In these runs, Papyrus most likely was really confused, and he also may not even be the great Papyrus at this point either. It's really fun to think about how he may have interacted with the monsters around him, especially his brother, who could possibly be the only friend he had at this time. This in itself could go two main ways depending on Sans' memory of the resets. If Sans remembers them, he would be equally confused, and that changes how Papyrus and him would interact. While if he doesn't remember them, it affects that differently. If Sans doesn't remember, then the two of them could have tried to figure out what was going on, but then Sans would forget again, and again, and again. If he does remember, it also depends on how these runs would affect him. If these runs made Sans feel helpless because of how everything keeps going back and how nothing stays permanent, who's to say that his brother may hide that he shares this pain, so that he could always see that his brother, Papyrus, can still be happy and unaware. Sure, very fanon, but whatever man, I like it this way. Either way, whether or not Papyrus shares that he remembers this stuff with Sans, I'm sure it can be twisted to a false memory or misremembering after a lot of resets. Then, during the latter end of Flowey's runs, who's to know how violent these could have been? In my early Papyrus phase, I absolutely loved thinking about this, probably due to a thorn in my side in that one Pap Chatter blog. If you aren't catching my drift here, it's basically just about how much cruelties he went through in these runs. The aftermath is an entertaining part of it for me, like waking up after death. How does it affect him physically and mentally? How easily can he mask what he's going through? I'll talk more about why this was so fun to think about for me when I talk about why he hides that he remembers them. Now, of course, there's Frisk's runs, or the players, whatever you like to call it. I have a lot of diverging headcanons as to how this goes for him because of the various diverging runs he can go through. Like in one world, he may only go through the pacifist run. In another, he may go through the classic neutral to pacifist to no mercy situation. Or maybe some sort of Shay speedrun situation. It would be honestly kind of hilarious. One I've been super interested in lately is one where there have been a bunch of neutral experimental runs, and then Frisk sticks with pacifist. I find it really fun to think about how he may subtly avoid getting attached to the surface, and the process it takes for him to slowly, eventually, accept that there are no more resets. Really heartwarming. And also really easy to get gut-wrenching if there is a reset after he finally believes that there would be no more runs. I'm not going further into this because I don't want to have to worry about conveying all of it while still being comprehensible. Okay, now for why he may hide that he remembers resets. Two main reasons I stick with are him wanting to protect Sans' feelings, and so that he can deter Flowey or us from doing shitty things to others without catching on that he is purposefully doing that. The Sans one is one I don't focus on a bunch anymore, but it does work well with the lies he says when Sans is around. Now for how he uses this hidden knowledge to protect others. Again, Papyrus is one of Flowey's favorites. How? Well, Papyrus most likely learned a lot about Flowey through the various runs, and since he knows that Flowey can be incredibly violent due to his curiosity, he could easily center the curiosity on himself to prevent Flowey from harming others. A stubborn, yet entertaining, unsolvable puzzle of a character is exactly what could keep someone focused on him instead of other characters. Hell, it worked on me! I actually have a comic that directly relates to this, which the amazing Rain voices dubbed, link in the description. Basically, this headcanon implies that he sacrifices himself for the good of others, which works with his low self-esteem and good-hearted nature. Speaking of self-sacrifice, let's think about his death in the actual game. In the one you may be thinking of, the No Mercy route, he doesn't attack us. Instead, he appeals to your empathy, believing you can still do good. We, as the players, do not have a real indication that he could remember the runs. All we know is that he knows we are dangerous. He knows that we have killed so many people, and yet he still pleads to our consciousness. This is what strayed so many people from doing a full no mercy route. Sure, people have given up on Undyne's or Sans' fight, like me, but so many people online have talked about how they couldn't go through with killing Papyrus. They felt too bad. And this is perfect. If you want a more in-depth analysis of how Papyrus' speech is so persuasive and effective, check out Dandelion's post about this that I'll be linking in the description. Anyways, by, in this scenario, keeping the fact that he remembers resets a complete mystery, that attempt at sparing is so much more impactful. He knows that with enough determination and time, any fight he puts up will be meaningless. Other than that, his sillier deaths are also related to this idea. If you kill him in neutral, he literally makes a Hamlet reference in his death. He doesn't express any real sorrow about his own death. It would make perfect sense if he had already been killed time and time again, wouldn't it? It's much easier to poke fun at your own death if you're already used to the sensation. But let's go one step further. The headcanon that I absolutely love, one that I sprinkle in whenever I can into my art, and is also a huge stretch, and I'm assuming my realer friends stop watching by this point. He wants to die. I don't mean he likes dying, I mean that he's tired, that he wants a break. A long, long break. But he can't, because the great papyrus would never take a break for any sort of reason, and this sort of break couldn't last forever. And if the wrong monsters find out how the break occurred, they will remember forever. He can't break the illusion. He can't. Wouldn't that be such a horrifying situation? Living forever and ever, going back in time without controlling it, going through immense horrors, and smiling through it all. Especially with lines like, I want to meet death. It doesn't feel impossible to imagine him with suicidal ideation at the least. Just reiterating, I do not think that most of what I'm saying is canon or will ever be canon, but it is so, so fun to think about. Also, in relation to Deltarune Papyrus, whether or not he could be from Deltarune to begin with, it is the closest thing we have to what Papyrus may have been long before we meet him in Undertale. Like Mettaton, this is before he becomes the Great Papyrus, and he is very alone. His only friend is his brother, and he does not go outside. In Undertale, prior to any of the resets, who's to say Papyrus wasn't already going through stuff mentally anyways? He isn't very popular in Undertale, with 3 friends to his name, including his own brother. You could also argue that Alphys could be his friend since they're friends on the internet, but that still isn't a lot. Most people even refer to Papyrus as Sans' brother. Literally, Undyne and Flowey are the only characters who refer to Sans as Papyrus' brother, rather than the other way around. I mean, he has a really low self-esteem, has barely any friends, and who knows what his mysterious past is. I'm just saying, some suicidal ideation is totally up that alley. Anyways, you might have noticed that I make a distinction between Papyrus and the Great Papyrus in this video. I do this in order to separate the way Papyrus presents himself and who he may really be, with the word really in heavy quotation marks. I'm not saying that he hides every single thing about himself and changes himself completely, at least not canonically, but usually I do think of his persona as him, but a little bit different and less of a solid person. I see his persona formed by a mixture of him wanting more friends, wanting to keep the peace in a sense, and preconceived notions about himself. Little things about him lying to Undyne about liking greasy foods shows how easily he changes how he presents himself towards others in order to maintain their friendship. Obviously, Undyne would still be his friend even if she knew he didn't like grease, but if he lies about little things like this, even if he doesn't perceive them as little, who knows what else he lies about? His whole persona is loud and boisterous, which conflicts so heavily with the Papyrus we hear about in Deltarune. He is so stuck being this version of himself that he doesn't let himself breathe, never taking off his figurative mask. Hell, he is literally wearing a costume throughout the whole game. He is babied by those around him, and that sort of behavior further keeps this mask in place. If everyone sees him as a naive skeleton, why would he go against that if he doesn't want people to realize his deep secrets? Sure, he says he wants to meet death, but that's just because Undyne brought up that she danced with death. Sure, he says, I would never go on a vacation for any reason, but that's just because he always does so much and views breaks as lazy, and it's such a silly line. He obviously has never had sands pass out deaths as vacations. There are so many justifications someone can make about how Papyrus is just like that, and he is, but there could be so much more. It is so fascinating to pick and prod at what could be papyrus and what could be the great papyrus, or how much they get intertwined, or how much he could lose himself in the process. Like, is his battle body just what he likes to wear now? Or is it an integral part of how he presents himself that he can't bear to just be the skeleton behind the costume? And something really important that relates to the other points I've made throughout this video is just how lonely Papyrus is as a character. I already slightly talked about that earlier on, but let's delve further into it. Again, he only has like 2 friends aside from his brother, and he's not very well known by the townsfolk in Snowdon. That isn't saying that they aren't aware of him, quite the opposite, but they don't know Papyrus as a person, shown by how, from what I've seen, they don't talk about interactions they have with him. What doesn't help is that, like I've said before, he's infantilized in game rather often. The shopkeeper in Snowdon gives him a lollipop whenever he comes by, as if he's a child, and even Monster Kid says, I wonder if that weird skeleton is an adult or a kid. Sans also seems pretty protective of him in some senses. And no, I don't mean the old Fanon sense where he babies his brother like hell. I mean things like the warnings he gives about fighting Papyrus if you're in the no mercy route. How he says, sarcasm isn't funny if you don't call Papyrus cool when you hang out with Sans. Him calling death a vacation, okay, I mentioned that already. But you get the point. What I'm saying is that nobody seems to really know him. That's not even going into the headcanons that have to do with remembering resets or aspects about his past. The most interesting thing about his loneliness is that while he's clearly on this quest to be popular and well known, he does so much that makes him even lonelier. With Undyne, he clearly hides things about himself from her, like his hatred for Greece, and keeps things from Sans in regards to his knowledge of things around him for some unknown reason. By putting up the front of the Great Papyrus, he distances himself from others because you need to show unfavorable or differing parts of who you are in order to get truly close with anyone. By changing his wills and interests with different people, he stops people from really knowing him, accidentally ensuring that he remains forgettable. As I stated before, almost everything you're told about Papyrus up front is said by people that aren't Papyrus. Even if you read through all of his dialogue, phone calls included, we are able to go back through his dialogue and posts via gameplay or just by looking through that one dialogue dump on GitHub, and we still don't know much about him as an individual. How the hell are townsfolk supposed to be real friends with Papyrus if the only way they casually learn about him is through anecdotes from Sans? And since they only know whatever information they have of him through Sans, Papyrus isn't even aware of how many townsfolk do notice him. While they don't truly know him, he is still well known in the town without him realizing. His presence in Snowdon alone is important, shown by the odd feeling the townsfolk have after Papyrus dies in the neutral runs, and how Monster Kid looks up to him in the pacifist run. But he doesn't know this in-game. He's on this desperate chase to be known in order to make up for his low self-esteem, self-sabotages this exact goal, and isn't even aware of how much of an impact he does have on the people around him. Okay, lots of X. Right up a lot of people's alley, but too much gets stale, doesn't it? So another big thing that has kept me hooked on his character is imagining how things can get better for him as well. And how do I do that? By building relations with other characters. Like, sure, Papyrus is hiding all this mumbo jumbo and whatever, but what happens if someone finds out? Like Sans, Undyne, Alphys, or even Flowey? It may seem weird that I brought up Alphys just there, but trust me, the Papyrus-Alphys dynamic would be so amazing. Especially if they meet at the waterfall dump somehow. But regardless, it would stress Papyrus out a bunch if anyone found out. But then what happens after? He could slowly learn to be more himself, whoever that is. He could learn that, no, the world doesn't end once you outwardly change as a person. Things can have permanent consequences, and that's okay. Or circling back to that idea way earlier in the video, where he's in pacifist run after a bunch of neutrals, learning to trust that he is safe and can just be. In this situation, I often think about him and Metaton being friends, since they wouldn't have really known each other that much pre-surface, so it would be pretty interesting. Honestly, I'm not going super into detail about this stuff because I usually lose interest in scenarios after I share them, so that's why I'm being kind of vague about them. I love to think about Papyrus' struggles with how he presents himself and interacts with others, just as much as how I love to think about him getting help with those struggles. Aside from aspects of his mental state and how he presents himself as a person, Papyrus seems to have odd abilities. As anyone who's played Undertale knows, he has the ability to walk on air after you spare him. He presents this as such a normal thing to do that he doesn't bring any attention to it, and unlike Sans and his shortcuts, none of his dialogue seems to be joking about how special this ability is. You could take this as him being completely unaware of how this ability is unique to him, but you could also take this in so many other ways as well. He could be very aware of this uniqueness, but acting oblivious to how odd it is because of how funny the absurdity would be. Or, this could be a really normal ability compared to other monsters, like the bird that carries us. He could be very aware of this uniqueness, but acting oblivious to how odd it is because of how funny the absurdity would be. Or this could be a really normal ability compared to other monsters like the bird that carries us. If we don't assume Papyrus has anomalous attributes, we could explain this as him using blue magic on himself. But other than this, he seems to be able to see your perspective as the player during phone calls, and has some fourth wall breaking directions, which, if you want to know more of, check out the post linked in the description labeled as Fourth Wall and Call. While I usually headcanon him to have memory of resets, for situations where I don't, I still try to make reasons for why he's able to do these things. Before I get into the main reasons I might give for them, let's also talk about how powerful he is. If you watch popular Undertale theories or shorts, you probably already know about this. Make it quick, Papyrus shows that he has incredible control of his magic by being the only monster who cannot kill you, meaning that he can tell what your HP is during battle and can easily change the damage of his attacks during his turn. This sort of ability makes sense once you remember that his brother has low HP or defense, whichever way you headcanon Sans' stats. Papyrus would still need to have decent control over his magic, but it is still really impressive nonetheless. Also, Papyrus does have blasters, as shown by his dialogue if you check his box of attacks after sparing him the No Mercy run. So, to sum up, Papyrus has anomalous abilities, has an incredibly good control of his magical output, and is much more powerful than he lets on. If you connect Papyrus to Gaster in some way, the anomalous abilities would make sense, wouldn't it? There are various theories and scenarios I like to play around with, like the now more popular Papyrus' Gaster theory, or AU. If you want to see more about this, check out the Forgettable AU comic and post down in the description. But anyways, there can be other reasons behind this, such as the handplates type situations that I briefly mentioned earlier. If Papyrus was trained as a subject, weapon, or some other purpose, your strength would make sense as well. I don't delve super deep into this anymore, but I remember I used to be super interested in this sort of scenario. Nowadays, I do like to imagine how this sort of past could affect Papyrus post-pacifist, or even during the game itself. Again, I don't view it as canon, but it is so fun to think about. Realistically, you could argue that Papyrus could be from Deltarune in some way, but I think we can only conclude that once we see him in Deltarune. It's not only just some funny joke that we can't see Papyrus yet, it's also because it will either confirm or deny the theory that Sans and Papyrus are from Deltarune. If Papyrus is younger than he is in Undertale, then the two of them are from Deltarune. If he is older or the same age as he is in Undertale, then they aren't from Deltarune. In true fandom nature, I've essentially just made an OC out of the skeleton. But an OC wouldn't hit as hard, so I'm still super attached to this stupidly genius skeleton. Speaking of genius, why is he so smart? His puzzles are good. They require advanced knowledge. Also, you won't know this unless you backtrack and call them, but he painted this area to make it look like there's a steep cliff. It is entirely safe around this bridge. Sure, a small point, but god, isn't that so interesting in comparison with the naive and dumb view that so many people used to have of him? Sections of the fandom still see him as a cinnamon roll, ooh, baby, or whatever, but people actually have gotten a lot better in that regard with how they view Papyrus over the years. It's becoming more and more common knowledge that he is smart, and not some really innocent child. And honestly, it's really fun to see more fanworks that reflect that. Aside from fanworks, it is interesting how he doesn't hide his intelligence when it comes to his ability to make physical things, like complex puzzles and paintings. However, he hides a lot of his knowledge of the world around him. Like I said earlier, he lies about knowing what a lab is, and about what happens to humans when they face Asgore. The difference between how much he lets on about what he's capable of doing and of what he's capable of knowing can be summed up perfectly in this piece of narration. The bookshelf is filled with complex tomes about puzzle creation and children's books. We as the player are shown amazing things that Papyrus is capable of, like making an invisible electricity maze. But after each and every amazing feat, something comedic happens that often makes Papyrus seem more childlike and dumb, like getting electrocuted by his own puzzle. This is really important when getting to know how the Great Papyrus works and why it's such a convincing persona. By acting aloof, unaware, and childish, according to others' standards, many monsters and players alike often don't even notice how brilliant he is. I think that's why Papyrus used to be known primarily as Sans' innocent younger brother, because so many people didn't look beyond what he presented himself as. Again, I'm not saying that he canonically remembers resets, is secretly super duper depressed, or anything like that, but it is really clear in just what his motives are and the little details of his dialogue that he's a lot less egotistical and a lot more perceptive than he lets on. Now, I know it may seem like I've been saying that Papyrus is a super duper stealthy guy who has complete awareness of how people see him and exactly what to do to keep it that way. That's not the whole picture. See, it's a lot easier to play into what people think of you rather than it is to lie about everything ever. He doesn't fully understand himself and his character, much like anyone would about themselves. But let's analyze this further. See, I'm learning about different literary theories in school this year, with my group focusing on psychoanalytical theory. For those who don't know, it's basically just looking through media while paying attention to how both the author and character's subconscious affect the events and actions that take place. Classical psychoanalysis also uses a lot of Freud's theories as a basis, but don't worry, I'm not doing any of the weird Oedipal conflicts. In this literary theory, some core issues that would apply to Papyrus are low self esteem and an insecure or unstable sense of self. These are pretty easy to surmise from the game itself, and I've already talked a good portion about this. Like, for example, he projects the thoughts he has of himself that directly correlate to his low self esteem onto Frisk before his fight. For something more subtle but not at all out there, his adoration towards Metaton as a celebrity could tie into his insecure sense of self. Metaton's persona exudes fame and seems really self obsessed. I'm not delving into Metaton on a more inner level because, honestly, you can find way better analysis posts of him from other people who can word it way better, but you can see how the Great Papyrus is similar to Metaton on an outer level, especially with the self obsession. Papyrus makes up for his low self esteem by acting as if he is extremely egotistical, and according to the celebrity he looks up to and admires, that works. I still think Papyrus definitely has a big celebrity crush on Metaton, but on a subconscious level, his own persona is influenced by what he sees on TV from Metaton too. Something really interesting to look at through this literary theory is the implications behind lost soul dialogue. You could argue that his behavior as a lost soul is akin to having his defenses go fully down. But let's look through the lost soul dialogue and see if that could really be the case. Alphys's lost soul dialogue goes as follows. You hate me, don't you? I've got to keep lying. All I do is hurt people. This could support that theory, but also, we know all of this by the point we get to this dialogue. Instead, we could dig and ask why she says these in the first place. These seem more like common thoughts she has. Even if she doesn't voice them out loud, they definitely aren't unconscious. Let's try Undyne. All humans will die. You're our real enemy. Mercy is for the weak. These obviously aren't her inner motives or thoughts by the end of the route. They again seem more like thoughts she reinforced throughout her life. You could argue that her desire to protect others, be a hero, and bring hope to monster kind motivates these thoughts, though. Still, this isn't necessarily showing anything super hidden about her inner being. Now, let's look at Sans. Just give up. I did. Why even try? You'll never see him again. While in this one, you do learn something new about him, or at least you can use it to theorize about what that last line means. However, these don't feel like sentiments that Sans is unaware that he has. Are you picking up what I mean? The dialogue that lost souls have feel more like defenses against revealing their unconscious core issues, desires, or whatever they may be. They say that the eyes are the window to the soul, so it really goes to show how the lost souls have their eyes covered. They are blinded, unable to see their real self when they're lost souls, a physical demonstration of their internal ignorance of self showing itself fully. And when I was discussing this with my friend Gray Science on Tumblr, they pointed out how you literally have to break down these defenses in order to save them, further proving that these lost souls don't represent their true selves, but instead what hides their true selves. Now, with this notion in mind, let's look at Papyrus's lost soul dialogue. I must capture a human, then everyone will. That first line in itself is covering up his insecurities. See, Papyrus's desire to capture the human is rooted in his desire to be popular, and that is rooted in him feeling like he's lesser than others. These desires are rooted in his insecurities, whilst also covering those very feelings up with what seems like arrogance to others. Nothing super new, but what interests me the most about his dialogue here is the silence at the end. Dot, dot, dot. He doesn't say that everyone will love him, or praise them, or finally treat him with the respect and recognition that he deserves. He says nothing. Isn't that amazing? His internal defenses, what has made the Great Papyrus, doesn't even finish its sentence. That aligns perfectly with how we don't see the full picture of who Papyrus is because of these defenses. So of course we don't even get that completed sentence because he doesn't have a real, concrete end goal. Of course he wants popularity, but if you try to understand why that silence, that lack of meaning is there, you'll see something deeper below that. To me, it seems that unconsciously, he is fully aware of how futile his attempts at popularity are. Deep down, he believes that it's both his true self and the Great Papyrus that pushes people further away from him. It's everything he is. It's something he has made himself to be, but he still feels alone. At a level that he obviously doesn't outwardly accept, but also wouldn't want to internally accept either, it's selective perception. He's only acknowledging what aligns with this view of himself and the world around him. This doesn't mean that it's true, but it seems to be his underlying truth. As I said earlier, he is unaware of how much the townsfolk really see and hear of him. As much as this is because he just doesn't know how much Sans talks about him, it's also because he unconsciously thinks that it's practically impossible for him to be seen and adored at any high volume. Alright, we've touched on Papyrus as a person, but let's get into the hypotheticals and even more into the dynamics he could have with other characters. First, what are his pre-existing relations with others in the game? Sans, Papyrus's brother. They both keep things from each other, and Papyrus at least is very aware of this, given by the line, Sans never tells anybody anything. I don't think Sans is entirely oblivious as to how Papyrus presents himself differently around others, especially since Sans has literally known him for Papyrus's entire life. Even with how much the two of them care for each other, there is a clear barrier between the two because of how much they keep to themselves. This barrier is what's really fun to explore. Undyne, Papyrus's boss. They're also friends, of course, but Papyrus doesn't seem to share much about himself to her. The scenarios I think about most between them are ones that delve into them sharing more about themselves. Something as simple as Papyrus telling her that he's never actually had spaghetti before could lead to them actually eating it. And it would be hilarious if he hates it. With things like sharing things about their past, it helps develop their friendship and the slow progression of him being more open about his thoughts and feelings to her, and it would also lead to Undyne doing less to protect his feelings, like she does in game. Flowey. Oh my god, Flowey. For the sake of simplicity, let's just go with my headcanon of Papyrus remembering resets and not delving into scenarios where he doesn't. Papyrus is Flowey's favorite, and Papyrus refers to Flowey as his friend in a phone call with Undyne. And Flowey does state that Papyrus made a Flowey fan club, so it's pretty clear that the two are close. While they may not share much about each other, they clearly know a lot about each other. I imagine Flowey would share a lot about himself with Papyrus over his runs, both to see where it goes, but also just because sometimes that's just what you do when you can make anyone forget what you said. For Flowey's case, I imagine he's had to pick and prod, metaphorically of course, a lot to get a decent amount of info on Papyrus. If the stuff we can extrapolate on Papyrus in-game is any clue, he's probably gotten most of his knowledge from other people. It creates an interesting dynamic where the two of them know so much about each other while being unaware of just how much the other knows about them, manipulating how they present themselves around each other while still having a real bond, even if that bond isn't a particularly healthy friendship. Again, I had canon Papyrus to intentionally make himself more of an interesting character to keep Flowey from emotionally or physically harming others, but I don't think he's fully aware of how much there is that Flowey wants to figure out about him. I also don't think he harbors any resentment towards Flowey either, because he has most likely witnessed firsthand how Flowey goes from trying to get the best ending for people to seeing Flowey try to do anything to satisfy his curiosity. Full disclaimer, I don't see Flowey as an adult. In most of my scenarios, I see Papyrus' view of Flowey to be more like a kid going down the wrong path, but nonetheless a path he could potentially steer him further away from. It isn't nearly as simple as that, but it fits with why he would be so forgiving and outwardly trust Flowey so much, even if he knows how badly things could potentially turn out. I absolutely adore their dynamic, if you couldn't tell. Frisk. His view of Frisk can be so different in so many different universes because it depends on whether or not Frisk resets, what run or runs they go through, and the decisions that are made for Frisk in terms of dialogue options, and whether they generally change throughout runs. I could go on and on about the intricacies, but also, if I did, I don't think I would ever finish this video. Just know that generally, I view him to not know what to really make of Frisk, since he doesn't find out about Frisk's story and motives throughout the game. Citizens of Snowdin. I already went through the general sense of how the townsfolk know him but don't really know him, and how he doesn't know about how much he affects everyone. So instead of restating all of that, let's move on to the hypothetical relations he could have with other characters. Doggo. I headcanon that Doggo prefers Papyrus over Sans due to how much Papyrus moves and how loudly he talks, making it easy for him to know if Papyrus is there. Doggo seems to be pranked a lot in this regard, given his dialogue if you keep ringing his station spell. So he would probably already prefer Papyrus compared to some others. I also like to think about how he would be able to notice, in some scenarios, if something is off about Papyrus. Like if Papyrus were to be entirely still in a room. There are a lot of really good fics that delve into this. I recommend just searching up the Papyrus and Doggo friendship tag on AO3 to find stuff that includes it. Alphys. I really love the potential friendship that her and Papyrus could have. She's friends with Undyne and Sans, so she's probably heard things about him. Papyrus has definitely heard things about Alphys prior due to his friendship with Undyne, but aside from just hearing about each other, they interact with each other online. And Alphys, in-game, seems to be a lot more open and seems to talk more online than she does in person. So there's a great potential for the two of them to chat online. And particularly in the pacifist route, the two of them do meet, of course, and his positive demeanor could really help her in the long run. But other than them potentially interacting, they have really interesting similarities. They both have mental health issues, and if you go along with my headcanons, they both are suicidal. I'm really fond of this one scenario I have where Papyrus is sitting at the waterfall dump, and Alphys finds him there. I haven't posted about it before, but I did have a fic idea for a series that includes it as a central plot point. But other than that, I think that in situations where Undyne could be more blunt and strong in her approach with people's issues, Alphys could provide that extra insight Undyne would need to handle things in a way that wouldn't be overwhelming. This works best with situations in a post-pacifist run where Undyne finds out about something major in regards to Papyrus. In relation to post-pacifist runs, I think that if the two of them were to become closer friends, Papyrus could learn to share things with and lean on Alphys the same way he invites her to do with him. Mettaton. Obviously, Papyrus has a huge celebrity crush on Mettaton, but what would Mettaton think of Papyrus? As far as it could potentially go in-game, he could possibly hear tidbits about him through Sans, since he does do stand-up at the Mettaton Hotel. But I doubt that he would pay special attention to the fact that Papyrus exists. What's interesting about canon interactions, though, is that Papyrus and his brother become Mettaton's bodyguards in the King Mettaton route. Given that this version of Mettaton isn't exactly the best person ever, I wonder what he would think of Papyrus in this route. Papyrus would try to see the best in Mettaton's leadership, and I think that he would at least be hesitant to outwardly go against Mettaton's decision as king. I believe this because of the way he speaks of the situation in the post-game call, and also because of how much he avoids voicing his opinions when they directly conflict with other people's preferences. The potential dynamic between the two sounds really interesting to explore, with a possible toxic relationship. Whether that relationship be platonic or romantic is another layer to how much you could go into the situation. However, in a post-pacifist run, that all changes greatly. Since it's clear that he reunites with napstamuse and his friends after the events of the pacifist run, I think Mettaton is actively working on himself on the surface. I think the potential interactions between him and Papyrus on the surface could be really fun to see due to this, and because he doesn't have any preconceived notions about Papyrus. If you really like this sort of dynamic, I recommend checking out The Walls Around Our Hearts on AO3. I'll link it in the description, just be sure to check the tags in case it includes anything you don't want to read. Anyways, the dynamic here is also because in this situation, Mettaton would be an actively changing character, and Papyrus would be forcing himself to stay as a static character because he's afraid that if he gets too attached, he'll miss it all even more when things inevitably go back. They'd be really interesting foils to each other in comparison to how they both parallel each other in-game. Their dynamic could be similar if it were pre any in-game ending though. In my opinion, Mettaton and Papyrus can have a really good chance of liking each other for who they are if there are the right opportunities for it. Especially since, in-game, Mettaton seems to be not that popular, since his regular view counts are extremely low. Chara. Okay, just listen to me here. It's mainly just because of fan content. I'll link this one comic by Plucky Thrall about them in the description, and if you get the vision, you get it. But if you ignore how biased I am, let's think of Chara for a second. Chara was Azrael's best friend. One of their most defining features is their smile, clearly struggling with self-esteem issues. And if you believe they are the narrator, they love puns. For self-esteem, watch an analysis of them, I beg you. But either way, don't these traits seem kind of familiar? Not only do they have these similarities, it's really interesting to see how Flowey looks up to both of them. While Flowey obviously wouldn't outwardly admit this, it's pretty clear he admires Papyrus in some sense, especially due to his fascination with Papyrus' character. Now, just imagine, if they somehow found a way to bring Chara back in some sense post-pacifist. The dynamic between the two would be amazing, okay? Asgore. Based off of canon dialogue, you can assume that Papyrus has already had friendly interactions with Asgore, since he calls Asgore a big fluffy pushover, and it's implied that he's already talked to Asgore about potentially joining the Royal Guard. Plus, Asgore even cuts a hedge in the shape of Papyrus' face post-pacifist. For me, I had the most fun thinking of post-pacifist dynamics between Papyrus and Asgore, especially since I like to imagine that Flowey eventually does talk to Asgore more often, and it would fit with Asgore's gardening. Generally, between Asgore and Papyrus, I think of Asgore as being one of the people that Papyrus could lightly confide in every now and then, and I think that Papyrus would help out a lot with the gardening that Asgore does. It isn't a dynamic that I indulge in a lot, but when I do, I really enjoy it. Things like having Papyrus over for tea, or Papyrus talking to Asgore during large gatherings between everyone, are just fun concepts to think about. Toriel. Toriel and Papyrus' dynamic would be pretty interesting. For this, I'm only going to be talking about a post-pacifist situation. I think there would definitely be an issue with infantilization, like how the townsfolk think of Papyrus as childish. I think this because of everything Toriel has probably heard of Papyrus from Sans, especially since Papyrus is the little brother, the general similarities between Papyrus and Azrael, and because Toriel is still healing from losing so many children that she once looked after. I don't view Toriel in a negative light because of this, especially since Toriel wouldn't be the only character to view Papyrus in this way, and this notion is further encouraged due to how everyone around Papyrus tends to view him in the same way. Nevertheless, this would lead to some frustrating situations between the two, but that doesn't mean that there would be a heavy strain in their friendship. In fact, I think they would be really good friends. For one, they both care about sand, so any major mishaps in regards to sands could bring them together better. But also, other aspects of their life could lead to fun bonding moments. Like for how terrible Papyrus is at cooking, Toriel could give him cooking lessons. And the infantilization I mentioned earlier can lead to them getting closer when she realizes and works on her view of him. And that would probably be directly tied to Toriel's own journey of working through her past, and tied to Papyrus's journey of allowing himself to be different than what others view him to be. Phew, okay, how did I even end up here? Like, how do you look at this thing and go, oh my god, he is hiding so much, someone assassinate him? Short answer, fan content. I wouldn't have gotten so much into his character if it weren't for the analysis posts I've read, the comics and fics I've read, and the many, many posts I've seen. So, while I am linking some posts that relate to what I've been saying down in the description, I really encourage you as the viewer to look further into people's fanworks and discussions on Papyrus or Undertale if you've enjoyed watching this. I'll link some other video essays people have made, but let's be real. You've probably already watched them if you're able to follow along with this whole video. If you haven't, then enjoy. Posts I'm linking are great and also expand upon topics that I only briefly brushed upon lightly in this video, and align a lot more with what is canon to the game. Feel free to share theories or observations you have or have found in the comments. I'd love to read them. Okay, I'm done. Thank you for listening to my ramblings, and I hope they were entertaining to some capacity. Subscribe please so I can monetize my stuff. Thank you! Especially with lines like, I want to meet I don't know how to say his voice. How do okay. His only friend is his brother, and he does not go outside. I could make a really funny joke there. His whole persona is loud and boisterous. Is that even how you say it? That is how you say it, right? Boisterous? Okay, thank you. His whole persona is loud and boisterous. Actually, I don't know. It doesn't sound like a word. Let me search up. Boisterous. Yes. Okay. Hallelujah. Which conflicts so heavily with the pirate. His whole with the pirate we hear about adultery. If we don't assume Papyrus has anomalous attributes, that doesn't make sense. Okay. Oh, attributes. Okay. If we don't assume Papyrus has anomalous attributes, anomalous?
Anonymous?
No, hold on.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I don't know what you're trying to...
I've said it too many times and that doesn't...
anomaly, like anomalous.
Yes. Okay, I was saying it right. So, to sum up, Papyrus has anomalous abilities. Yes. If you want to see more about this AU, check out Sunset's... Oh god, how do I say the name? If you want to see more about this AU, check out Sunset's art... Okay. If you want to see more about this AU, check out the Sunset... You know what? I'll just say the name of the AU.
Okay.
If you want to see more about this AU, check out the comic and posts below in the description that are of the Forgettable. No.